Hi folks, this is all the fruit. I'm in Heidelberg, Germany. It's the first days of April and the ornamental cherry sign flower. They're incredibly beautiful. They are still not at the peak of their flowering. I think with the warm weather we have now, it's basically t-shirt weather. The peak is gonna be in about 2 or 3 days. However, I have work on the Heidelberg University campus today. Since I'm trying to do my videos on my way to work and not to move around unnecessarily during the lockdown, I don't know if I'll be here in 2 or 3 days. So I'm doing the video now, so just imagine even a lot more flowers than this. Well, this is a channel about fruit, so why am I making a video about flowers? First, what is this stuff here? Aren't cherry flowers usually white? Usually people in the countryside know that cherry flowers are white, and people in the city know that cherry flowers are pink. Why? Well, in the countryside, in the forest and orchards and hedgerows, we have mostly our, well, cultivars and mixtures between cultivars and the wild form of Prunus avium, while in the cities we mostly have the Japanese cherry, Prunus serrulata, and mostly an ornamental variety called Kanzaan. Don't think I need to tell you about the Japanese customs about cherries. They plant those ornamental cherries everywhere. They have the Hanami or cherry flower festival in spring. The sakura or cherry flower is the symbol of Tokyo, and so on and so on. Let's look at those beautiful flowers. Oh, why is it called serrulata? Well, because the leaves are a little bit more serrated than in many other species. Look at that. Those little, almost like cilia from the edges of the leaves. Also, the leaves are quite reddish in many varieties, especially when they are young. That's quite typical. And yeah, why is this stuff being cultivated? Look at those beautiful flowers. This cherry sign, the rosaceae, so they have 5 petals. But if I try to count the petals here, I would get to like 30 or 60 petals. How is this possible? Well, if you look at one of those flowers, I don't want to kill it, so look closely inside. You will see a couple other interesting things. Look, there are little leaves inside this flower. Can you see the little serrated leaves? And the tip of those leaves are, what are those? Stigmata. Yeah, they look like stigmata. So they have a lot of petals. Let's check the sepals. No, they just have the normal 5 sepals. Come on, I don't want to break off a flower, so I have to bend them. So look, I have to do it in the sun somehow. Well, okay folks, I think you will forgive me if I break off one single flower. It's for science. So let's look at this flower. The 5 typical petals that are typical for rosaceae, and instead, the five sepals which are typical for rosaceae. But instead of the 5 petals, you have dozens of petals. And inside these things, you have stamens. Here you can see them. And then, instead of stigmata, instead of proper stigmata, you have stuff which looks like stigmata on top, but the bottom part looks like leaves. Let's go again to those serrated leaves with those cilia-like things on the outside, on the edges. And then look at those basal parts at the stalks on which the stigmata are located. They are leaves. Basically, they look like leaves. Well, this is not so surprising because all those petals and sepals And even the stamens and stigmata, they're basically like equivalent to leaves. They have all developed out of leaves. They started with ferns, where you had the spores on every normal leaf, and then later it got separated into sporophylls and trophophylls, and then the transition from ferns to conifers and now to gymnosperms, let's say. The reproductive parts got concentrated more and more into cones, and then later with the angiosperms they became flowers. But basically all those parts here have evolved from leaves, and so it's not so difficult to find mutations where those parts revert to things, to leaf-like organs. So for example, I think in those ornamental cherries, and also in a lot of other ornamental varieties of rosaceae, those additional petals are actually stamens, which basically don't look like stamens anymore, but like petals. And as you can see here, well, in those ornamental cherries, the petals, the stamens developing into petals, this is, of course, a desired effect. And also the stigmata developing into leaves is also a desired effect. Why? I mean, the stamens developing into petals, yeah, it's quite obvious. If you have more of those beautiful pink petals, I mean, this looks more impressive than a white-flowered, white-petaled European cherry, because it's so deep pink. But if you have 30 instead of the 5 petals, it's even more impressive. So yeah, the stamens developing into petals, yeah, that's a desired effect. But why is it desired that the stigmata basically become something like leaves? Can a stigma that looks in like a leaf in the basal part even develop a proper fruit? Well, in this case the answer is no. So why would you plant so many cherries which have no fruit but just flowers? Well, you can imagine in the cities nowadays, most people don't really like to pick their own cherries. They go to the supermarket. And also imagine those about 20 cherry trees. What will happen if they are full with cherries and like a couple tons of cherries ripen at once and start falling down on the students, or even worse, on the parked cars? The Germans say that the car is the favorite child of the German. Well, you cannot have cherries fall on cars in the cities. And of course, at the end, you end up with giant puddles of rotting cherry fruit on the ground. And also, of course, in the cities, there is some air pollution. At least in some areas, it's much higher than in the countryside. So the cherry fruit won't be as healthy as some cultivated on a pristine mountain slope by some old granny. So a lot of those ornamental varieties, especially in cherries, they don't have fruit. Well, actually here around the university campus, the botany Professor Lines, from about 20-30 years ago, he insisted that a lot of wild cherry species are being planted, even exotic cherry species from America and Asia. So we don't only have ornamental cherries, but of course the ornamental cherries are more beautiful and more impressive. But no fruit, folks. Look at that, 20-25 beautiful cherry trees, which will reach their peak in a couple of days, but no fruit. But wait, there is one cherry tree here which has fruit. Why has it got fruit? Look at that. Amidst all those pink flowers, there is a cherry tree with white flowers. But not all flowers are white. If you look at this cherry tree, most of the branches bear pink flowers. Only one really thick, powerful branch bears white flowers. Why? And, well, flowers are too high. Ah, there is one on the ground here. Okay, look at those white flowers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sepals. Stamens. And where are the stigmata? Come on, show me the stigmata. Show me the stigmata. Come on. Show me the stigmata. Well, let me see if I can see them. I cannot see stigmata right now. Well, there were a couple more flowers on the ground here already. I think I see something. Do I see something? No, I see only stamens here. But I know that this branch has stigmata in all its flowers. Nope. Okay. Here we have another flower. No, nothing recognizable. Well, folks, for some reason, I can... Sorry for my sniffling, I have a bit of hay fever. Okay, folks, where are the stigmata? Where are they? It seems like the central part of those flowers is missing. Look at that. There is basically a hole in each flower. Well, if you look from the bottom, and if I move the sepals out of the way, which is a little bit hard to do with one hand, you see that each of those flowers has a small hole in the middle. Here I ripped it apart. Yeah, so that's why I cannot find stigmata in those flowers. But I know for sure that those flowers have stigmata. How do I know this? Well, because this is the only branch in this whole street full of dozens of cherry trees which has cherries in late spring or early summer. That's why I know that those flowers actually have well-developed stamens and stigmata and produce fruit, unlike all the others. So why is there one single branch on one single tree in this whole bunch of cherries? Well, I mean, the simplest answer would be, yeah, they just planted one European fruit-bearing cherry tree with all the Japanese trees, but that's not possible because all the other branches of the trees of the same tree have pink flowers and no fruit. Well, maybe some random mutation, some atavism, that this branch suddenly reverting to a fertile state. Well, no. One hint or two hints are, firstly, look at this branch. It's bigger and more vigorous than any branch on any cherry tree and all those dozens of trees. There is not a single branch nearly as big and as tall and as vigorous as this branch. Look at that. It's like 4 meters taller than all the other trees. A second hint is, look at that. There is a branch next to it which is completely dead. The next branch is dying. Here, this branch has been cut back, meaning that it's also dying. Here, 1, 2, 3, 4 branches have been completely cut off. Why? Why is this branch so vigorous that it's growing, being the size of like 10 other branches and killing all the branches around it? Do trees do that? Do single branches compete with each other? Well, the answer is this is not one tree. Those are 2 trees. This is a grafted tree, like all the other ones here. This base is some vigorous, well, cherry cultivar with fruit. It's not a wild cherry because I know the fruit, and there are some, yeah, not very modern but not too primitive cultivar. I've been eating the fruits of this branch for many years. And on top of this, rootstock. Somebody grafted several branches of Prunus serrulata, probably the variety Kanzaan, a sterile variety. Well, according to most people who plant ornamental cherries, those pink flowers with the many petals are more interesting and more beautiful and more valuable and less dirty than those white ones. Well, the bees think otherwise. If I could zoom in, you would see a couple of bees flying around those branches. Sometimes the bees would also fly around those trees until they drop dead from exhaustion, because usually in most of those beautiful ornamental varieties of trees and flowers, there is no nectar and no pollen. But right now there are not too many bees. I guess there are not too many beehives around here, but all the bees I can see are around those flowers. So yeah, they grafted the ornamental branches on the ornamental Prunus serrulata branches on a Prunus avium rootstock. And yeah, sometimes that works out well, but in many cases you have to come back every year and cut down the branches of the rootstock, which, remember, is more vigorous. That's why you use a different rootstock. That's why you don't just plant a Prunus serrulata, but plant a Prunus avium with Prunus serrulata branches grafted on it, because you think that the Prunus serrulata branches are what you want. Basically the flowers are what you want, but you want a vigorous tree. Look at that. Here one of those Prunus avium is producing little suckers. So the vigorous tree is trying to outcompete and kill the grafts with all means possible, creating suckers from the roots, creating branches from the stem. As you can see, this branch is slightly lower than all the other branches. I guess that's why it wasn't removed. It's just slightly lower. So when they came to cut the Prunus avium branches, usually in winter, as you can see, they cut everything which is down here, because they knew that this is Prunus avium. But this one they didn't know it's Prunus avium, because it was winter and they couldn't see the flowers or the fruit. And it's basically almost on the same height as the grafted Prunus serrulata branches, so they left it alone. And that's how this branch survived. And now it's so big that you cannot just cut it with small tools like what they do every year. And basically nobody bothers to call a specialized company with a chainsaw and a truck to cut it down. So folks, those were the beautiful Japanese flowering cherries, one of the most important symbols of Japan. But if you see such cherries, well, enjoy the flowers in spring. Also enjoy the nice leaves and shade in summer. But don't come back in June and expect to harvest any fruit from those cherries. I mean, it would be wonderful for urban foraging. You could get a couple tons from those trees you can see here in a good year. Only if you see single branches with white flowers on those Japanese cherry trees, yeah, then you can come back like 6 weeks or 2 months later and expect a lot of nice and tasty cherries. Just don't fall from the cherry trees, and just don't tell anybody that I told you to forage for cherries in the cities. So folks, this was Prunus serrulata, the variety Kanzaan, grafted on Prunus avium on the Heidelberg University campus. Stay tuned for a lot more fruit videos from the beautiful city of Heidelberg. And don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe.